While Friday's attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband was certainly disturbing, it's hard to say it was shocking after the political animus and violent rhetoric we've seen in recent years. Prosecutors say the QAnon-supporting suspect, David DePape, went after Paul Pelosi with a hammer after he broke into the home and couldn't find the speaker. Federal prosecutors charged DePape today with attempted kidnapping and with retaliating against the federal official by threatening or injuring a family member, and police say he had a list of other people he may have planned to target. Paul Pelosi is still in the hospital, recovering from surgery to repair a fractured skull. While many prominent Republicans have spoken out against the attack, one in particular has not. His successor did, though.
You can't just say, I feel badly about the violence. We condemn it. Condemn what produces the violence. And this talk produces the violence.
I'm joined by former Homeland Security official Juliette Kayyem. Juliette's also a senior lecturer at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, CNN commentator, and of course, a longtime Boston Public Radio regular. Juliette, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
So if reports are to be believed, if Nancy Pelosi was home, it's fairly likely she would have been murdered. So does the attack on her husband, the brutal attack on her husband, and the near miss with her change anything, or is it just business as usual?
Well, I hope it's not business as usual. We certainly know from the suspect that the intended victim was Nancy Pelosi. He said, "Where's Nancy?" And he has now confessed after Miranda warnings to wanting to tie her up. Let's just make this clear: tie her up, get her to tell the truth. If she didn't tell the truth, right, presumably about the election, he would break her kneecaps so that she would have to wheel herself into the House chambers, and other Democrats would see what happens to them. So the idea that this is just like San Francisco crime is ridiculous, or the idea that Paul Pelosi is anything but a stand-in for her. And that's essentially what the federal charges are. They are, if you go after a family member with the intention of terrorizing or intimidating a public figure, it's the same. So this is political violence. There's no point in pretending otherwise at this stage.
You know, I mentioned at the top that a couple of prominent Republicans did do the right thing. Yeah. I want to talk for a second about a few who did not. Here is the darling of many of the moderates in the Republican Party, the newly elected governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. Here he is.
There's no room for violence anywhere, but we're going to send her back to be with him in California. That's what we're going to go do. That's what we're going to go do.
And on the same day, Donald Trump thought it was important enough to mention the death of Jerry Lee Lewis, but the bludgeoning of the husband of the speaker merited nothing from the former president, who could have had an impact. And finally, the new owner of Twitter tweeted, as you see here, there's a tiny possibility there might be more to the story than meets the eye. We don't have to go into what it was, Santa Monica Observer, a sort of scandalous kind of thing. It was so empty that Musk himself deleted it 3 hours later. It seems to me that things like that from people in high places do nothing but encourage other people to do what this guy did, no?
That's exactly right. There's two reasons that they're doing it. So the first is, of course, they need a counter narrative to wipe their hands of a violent movement that they've certainly nurtured or embraced for the last couple of years. So even someone like Youngkin, who is apparently a moderate, he goes out to support the Arizona Republican, Carrie Lake, the Republican candidate, who is a absolute, stop the steal, January 6th truther type person. So there's no point in calling him a moderate anymore. So why is this happening? They need a counter narrative to focus away from them. And so that's essentially what's happening. We have no responsibility for this. And by the way, there's some other narrative. It's either crime or some scandalous, disgusting theory. And so then people start talking about that. The other reason why this is dangerous or why they do it is because obviously in the silence, even in the silence, let alone the jokes or the nurturing, this is where all of this violence festers because it is not shut down by the leadership of the Republican Party. And I have to say, look, I'll concede that there's violence on the left. We've certainly seen that on the left. You cannot say with a straight face that any person in leadership of the Democratic Party would support, let alone basically nurture and complement violence in the way that an apparatus an apparatus led by their likely nominee in 2024 has done so. So that is what's happening at this stage. And the pathetic thing about it for the Republicans is they could really, I mean, Trump is weaker than they think, and they constantly treat him like Voldemort on Halloween. I'll mention that reference. And look, I mean, if they start to isolate him over this and other things, they can rid him of what he's doing.
Staying with the theme, I'd vote for Voldemort before I'd vote for the other one. Juliette, we all know that because the election was stolen from Donald Trump, according to Donald Trump, we got January 6th. Is there any reason to think that if any of the election deniers running for Senate or governor, like you just mentioned, Kari Lake, for example, if they lose, is there any reason to think that they're not going to say their election was stolen, and thus, maybe only locally, who knows, more of the January 6th same is a week or so away from us?
That's exactly the fear, and that I wouldn't anticipate Kari Lake would concede anymore. I mean, we're seeing this in Brazil. He has not conceded yet.
Yeah.
These are people who do not believe in democracy in any fundamental way or the peaceful transfer of power. They are essentially just babies and sore losers. The other thing that makes me a little bit nervous, as one should be going into next week, is certainly this narrative that is not proven in the polls, that things are awfully close in places where they really don't appear to be awfully close. Because what that's going to do, I mean, I understand media likes a dog, fight and whatever, but what that's going to do is every loser who would have who intended to lose will then claim that the vote wasn't fair. Look, Trump broke. He broke his oath in many ways, but the peaceful transfer of power will ultimately, I think, be it might be his most successful policy in terms of legacy, because putting the genie back in the bottle is going to take a long time. It's going to just take decisive crushing, in the election, voting wise, of this part of the Republican Party.
Speaking of crushing, you convinced me after saying it repeatedly on the radio with us that the relentless prosecution of January 6th insurrectionists would likely quell similarly minded people in the future. I just looked up some FBI statistics comparing domestic terrorism. This is from the FBI in 2020 to 2021, and you can see the numbers. I'm sure you know them. The numbers essentially doubled approximately from 2020 to 2021. So were you wrong or something else at play here?
No, I think that there's I'm not wrong. Let me tell you what is happening is there's no reason to suspect that these numbers are growing in terms of support for violent extremism. What we are seeing is that the violent extremism is becoming more tolerated in the Republican Party. So so your overall numbers, there's not been a lot of attacks. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is the change of it. So how do I know this? I look at the same things you do, which is the recruitment efforts of the major terror organizations, which are depleted. They can't raise money. They can't recruit. The numbers for Trump, who is likely, despite everything, bankrupt, and he cannot fill a room in any meaningful way anymore. And he does these rallies. And this is the irony of the Republican, or, if people who want to save the Republican Party, which I hope they figure it out, which is this is the moment to begin that sort of purging of that element of the GOP, and in particular after Friday's attack against the Pelosi family. And they just can't seem to get themselves to do it, which may suggest they either don't want to or they don't know how. But this is something that the Democrats can't save the Republican Party from. They've got to figure out how they isolate this element, or for those who don't want it, abandon the party. But right now, I can't separate the violent extremism from the party anymore.
And one of the ironies, and I think you've said this too, if had a few more Republican senators a couple of years ago had the courage of what they said immediately after January 6th and voted guilty in that impeachment trial, we might have a very different America.
Yeah, well, I often, if McConnell had stuck to his post-January 6th guns and not folded, think how different the world would be. I mean, he would be, he'd be in Florida on his True Social. So this is a significant problem, but the frustration is that this is also solvable, but it's going to take the Republican Party to figure it out.
Juliette Kayyem, good to see you. Thanks so much for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Thank you.